Hello and welcome to The Blueprint, Canada's Conservative podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, in beautiful Ontario. We're broadcasting live for a special Thursday COVID-19 edition of The Blueprint. We thank you very much for joining us. We got a great show lined up for you. And as always, to our friends watching on the various platforms, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, you name it, please help us push back against the ever-moving Liberal agenda. Comment, share, like, subscribe to this program, and also those listening in on the various platforms, whether it be iTunes, Spotify, Castbox, Google Music, what have you. Please tell your friends about us. We need your help, again, to push back against that Liberal agenda. As mentioned, a fantastic show for you today. We're going to talk to two Alberta members of Parliament today. We're going completely west, and we're going to talk to Stephanie Kusie in the second half of the show. She's the Member of Parliament for Calgary-Mindepur. She's also the Shadow Minister for Families, Children and Social Development. We're going to talk about the Service Canada issues and the processing of all these applications that are flooding the department and how they're getting the money out to Canadians in need. But first, we have James Cumming, the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre, the newly elected Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre. He's also the Shadow Minister for Small Business and Export Promotion. James, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us here today.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me, Jamie. Looking forward to it.
Well, we know you are busy. I know you have committee coming up very shortly, so let's get right to it. The wage subsidy, I think that's something we should start with anyway. That is a program aimed at helping small businesses that are able to stay in business and operating through this crisis, and other ways to keep that connection between the employer and the employee, so that when we do get through this, whatever normal looks like at the end of this, they're able to get up and running that much quicker.
Yeah, the Liberals did announce a platform for the wage subsidy. It started off as a 10% subsidy, which really was very ineffective. So from the work of you and me and other colleagues and other advocates, we were able to have that wage subsidy increased to 75%. For those businesses that are still operating with some revenues, albeit a drop year over year. There's a fair bit of restrictions on the policy on how it's executed, so it's created some confusion. We're working our way through that, but in effect, if you've seen a revenue drop of 30% year over year, 15% in the month of March, because the halfway through the month is when the crisis started, or you have a rolling months that you've been able to demonstrate that you've had a reduction, that you're going to be eligible for this subsidy. The problem, Jamie, is that, this has been going on since March, and the portal will open on April 27th. Once you go in and you apply, likely they say there'll be a week for approval, and then sometime after that, you'll receive the funds. So the issue we've got is, what are these businesses going to do in the short term for that lack of working capital that they probably have to push through that many payrolls through that period of time?
Now, prior to this, you had a number of achievements within your career, including the head of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. So I appreciate you spending time with us. And maybe you can, you mentioned a few concerns there, and I'll get to that in just one second. But maybe you can talk about some of the concerns you may have had from the business community, being from Edmonton Centre, and through your contacts with the Chamber of Commerce. Are there any other concerns that they're having? I know there's many, but I do want to come back to the original one, but I just want to get a broader sense of what you're hearing.
Sure. Yeah, I've spent my life in the small, medium-sized business market, including the work that I had at the Chamber. And I would tell you that what I'm hearing from people is that they're concerned about this absolute stop in revenue. So everything that has been proposed, time to market is critical. And that's been the biggest single issue, is time to market, because these businesses, they need help and they need it now. So that's one piece. The second piece is that the relationship between the employer and the employee has changed over the years, and not everybody is necessarily an employee with employment income. So they may get dividend income, they may get contract income. We've heard from chiropractors, physiotherapists, we've heard from doctors, dentists, we've heard from a large array of people, and they're concerned that it's very restrictive and doesn't clearly understand that relationship of what an employer is and what what an employee is. And certainly with the smaller shops, with the people that are, they're working hard, they're great entrepreneurs, and they may take dividend income, so they won't be eligible for some of the programs. So those are some of the things. The deferrals, all the things that we've heard about in deferrals has been a big issue because they're concerned when I can finally open my doors again and I can finally start to operate again. I've deferred rent, I've deferred utilities, I've deferred my property taxes, and now I need to bring my people back. And they're really concerned whether they'll have the working capital to do that.
That's what I'm hearing on my end too, James, is the number of businesses trying to make that decision whether or not they go further in debt, knowing that they have this big number at the end whenever they are able to open, and how they're going to manage that. So that is an extremely real concern to these small business owners. And I'm glad you mentioned this. The people collecting dividends, they are not able to collect the wage subsidy to allow their business. And I know that's something that you're fighting for as well as our other team members.
Right. And along with the loan program, with the CEWS program, the $40,000 loan, there's a threshold on payroll. And if you are a shop that is, the owners are taking dividends, and maybe they're the only employees, maybe they're only people working in the business, they may not generate that $20,000 worth of payroll income, but they may have generated it through dividends and they're not eligible. And we think that's blatantly unfair.
So, going back quickly to the wage subsidy, and this is something that the opposition and you and Pierre and Dan Albus and many others fought so hard for, was bringing it from 10% to a lot higher. Now we're at 75%. There are some European countries that have gone higher than that, but that is something that is going to help small businesses through this very hard time. And something that we need to keep addressing, because other problems have come out of this. There are people in my riding that have taken loans out before this crisis hit that are being now told, even though they're shut down, they have to pay back not only the interest, but the principal, where there is no gap time for them to kind of catch their breath and catch up and maybe even open again.
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation, Jamie, because here you have these entrepreneurs that no fault of theirs, like they're running a business, they were going along and they're doing what they do and doing it well. And now they're shut down. And so they're starting to accumulate some debt. They're starting to accumulate all these deferred payments. And they really they're feeling like they need some help or some relief from what it will look like when they start again. So I think on forward policy, we certainly have to think that through, and the government's got to realize there'll be a raft of people that are trying to start up again. That said, we're also racking up massive spending over a very, very short time. So we do have to figure out on that spending is directed to those that really need it, and that spending is directed to those that are going to need that assistance. So when we come out of this, Jamie, some businesses, their path to revenue growth might be fairly quick, because for example, if a dentist has been closed for 3 months, my suspicion is there'll be a whole lot of people that want to go see their dentist. So their revenue track might be a lot different than a restaurant that may only be able to open partially, depending on what regulations are set in front of them. So I don't think one size fits all in these programs.
I agree. And travel, probably one of the last to open up and get back to normal. So as John Williamson said, the member of parliament for New Brunswick Southwest, when I had him on the show last week, this is why socialism doesn't work, because there are so many individuals, so many businesses falling through the cracks.
That's entirely right. And I think we also have to rely somewhat on the private sector to work some of this out. So if you have a relationship, a tenant has a relationship with the landlord has a relationship with the bank, and the government has plowed significant money into the banking industry. So there should be a flow there. There should be that the banks are saying, okay, we'll blend and extend. And then the landlord should be talking to the tenants on a blend and extend. And that doesn't need an additional level of subsidy if it's done right. So I think that's the direction that the private sector can react if given the right tools.
Now let's quickly talk about this, is the rent subsidy that was announced. Details are still coming because, of course, this falls under provincial jurisdiction. But that is something I think that landlords are waiting for. And of course, May 1st is coming up very soon, and rent is due on a lot of these properties.
Yeah, and that what you alluded to the problem, because it's under provincial jurisdiction. So to try and get an agreement between the province and the feds is more difficult, more complicated. I would tell you the biggest single issue there that I see is, again, they made an announcement about a week ago where they said they were going to do something, and all that does is create anticipation and angst, because as a business owner, you don't know where this is going, what direction it's going. So you're making business decisions on the fly right now, worrying about keeping your business open, but you don't know what is coming down the pipe. So it makes it really difficult to try and react to this. So hopefully we'll hear something with details, details that are clear, so that businesses can react to it in each of the provinces.
A large part of my area is tourist related, meaning we have a lot of summer properties. So the season where small businesses, and the vast majority of business in my riding is small businesses, they need that tourist season. And we all know it's very small, and that window is tight and shrinking now because of COVID-19. And I don't expect you to make up policy or on the side, but it's a very complicated conversation that I think everyone's going to have on how we open the economy slowly in a smart manner that's responsible, protecting our most vulnerable, which are seniors in a lot of cases. And that is a conversation that we're going to have because as it gets warmer, it's going to be harder to keep, I think, people indoors.
Yeah, I think you've got the major issue that we have right now, business people, particularly those people in seasonal markets, but across the board. What I hear from them is, I want to get back to work, and I want to do it in a safe fashion. Like they don't want to put anybody at risk, but they do want to get back to work. And so I think the sooner that we can come up with strategies to make that happen, the better for all of them, the better for their mental health, and it'll be better for the economy. So I think that's where the conversation here quite shortly is going to have to go. And you already see it with provinces. I think Saskatchewan's announcing something, if not this week, next week. I hear Alberta's on the same path. Next week, they're going to start talking about it. And I think the federal government should start talking about it, or at least starting to lay some things out so people know what things might look like.
So, James, before we let you go, maybe you could quickly just go over the timeline with the wage subsidy program again. I know you said at the beginning, but anyone just tuning in, maybe you can just quickly go over the timeline so that we can get an idea of when employers can see some movement.
Sure. The portal will be open April 27th. So I encourage all employers to get their information into the portal. The government has told us that the approval process will be approximately a week, and then funds, if you're on a direct deposit system, should flow 2 or 3 days after that. I encourage all the listeners, if they've gone into this process and they're not having success, or it's stretching out much longer than that, we surely need to hear about that so that we can advocate on their behalf.
Well, thank you very much, James. Any parting words you'd like to leave us with?
Nothing but listen, people. I know my colleagues and we're listening, we're hearing. I know it's difficult, but we will come out of this, and we're working hard for you in our constituencies and in Ottawa all the time. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you very much. That's James Cumming, the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre. He's also the Shadow Minister for Small Business and Export Promotion. Great conversation. Again, we have Stephanie Kusie coming up in the second half of the show. She's the Member of Parliament for Calgary-Mindapore. A great conversation you're going to want to stick around for. Remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint. Welcome back to the second half of the Blueprint, Canada's Conservative podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock in Ontario, as we conduct this special COVID-19 edition of the Blueprint on Thursdays. Of course, our regular time is Tuesdays at 1:30 Eastern. We hope you can join us then and always. And of course, we always ask that you help us push back against that ever-moving Liberal agenda. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Tell your friends about us, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be on the audio portion, using platforms like Castbox, Spotify, Google Music, iTunes. Help us promote this message and, again, fight back against the Liberal agenda. So, as mentioned, we had a great guest from Edmonton Centre, James Cumming, on our first half of the show. We now have Stephanie Kusie, the Member of Parliament for Calgary-Mindeport. She's also the Shadow Minister for Families, Children and Social Development. Thank you so much for joining us here, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Jamie, for having me. I noticed on the Princess Margaret's Home Lottery this year that the grand prize is a cottage on the Kawartha Lake. Well, in fact, that's the second prize. First prize is you get Jamie Schmale as your MP.
So it's a double bonus, really. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. You're absolutely right. I have bought my ticket, so I'm ready, just in case.
Good stuff.
So this is a COVID-19 special edition on Thursday of the Blueprints, and according to the stats we have, there are 40,824 confirmed cases of COVID-19 across Canada. Ontario and Quebec, the big share, the lion's share of that, with 33,844 cases. And in the province of Alberta, you've got 3,400 cases. But a lion's share of that is in the city of Calgary, unfortunately. Maybe you can just tell us a bit about that.
Sure. Well, I do make the best attempt to tune into the daily update by both our Premier Jason Kenney, as well as Dr. Dina Hinshaw, who's done an amazing job of navigating this crisis for the province of Alberta. And based upon their information, it seems to me there are sort of two major factors which have led to a considerably larger outbreak here. The first is, of course, Calgary being one of the 4 designated international airports within Canada. So that certainly didn't help with the spread. And secondly, I would say is similar to what we're seeing in Ontario and Quebec, is the presence of the disease in long-term care facilities. It sort of seemed to take hold earlier there, and unfortunately, like many places across Canada, has caused the greatest amount of disease there, and sadly the greatest amount of mortality as well. But it's very difficult to see. Southeast Calgary has been hit particularly hard, not only within Alberta, but within Calgary. And so with that, I would say citizens here are really taking the public safety measures very seriously. If I go for walks in the community, people are staying 2 meters apart, really respecting that social distancing, and finding unique ways of dealing with the crisis. Yesterday, for instance, was my son's birthday, and we had the Calgary Fire Department come by and sound their siren. And it was really quite a moment of joy and spectacle for the neighborhood as everyone came running out to see the fire truck there. And I think that we, like all Canadians across the nation, are just finding new ways to bond and to share. As a result of this crisis, we're making lemonade out of lemons.
Yes, absolutely. Now, as you mentioned, people are adjusting to this new reality, and part of that new reality is applying to organizations and departments like Service Canada and the Canada Revenue Agency for some relief, whether it be businesses, whether it be individuals. Maybe you can, in your role as Shadow Minister, maybe tell us about how complicated and how well the department's been doing in terms of getting that money out as quickly as possible.
Sure. Well, I would say from the policy perspective, when the programs were initially announced, there were many gaps that existed, but I, along with my colleagues, Dan Albus in particular, as our Shadow Minister for Employment, as well as Karen Vecchio, Shadow Minister for Status of Women, have done our best to identify these gaps and bring them to the attention of the various ministers. And so I think as a result of that, we are seeing more gaps filled, and I would say more and more specific permeations of gaps which are being brought forward. But I think as we're seeing those slowly addressed, we are finding that more and more Canadians are having their needs met through these various programs, the CERB in particular. When I initially had my overview with the Parliamentary Secretary for Families, Children and Social Development, I was actually shocked by his confidence in the CERB benefit being delivered. And in fact, myself, Dan Albus, and as well the Shadow Minister for Canada Revenue Agency, Marty Morant, actually wrote a letter saying, you had better deliver. And I would say, generally speaking, they have, that these funds have been placed into bank accounts. We're seeing a few gaps still. The first one is those who had applied for EI. They are still required to wait the time that was required for EI applications, not giving the speedy treatment that CERB has been given. So we are seeing some delays with that, definitely. But another glaring oversight seems to be with the closure of the Service Canada centres. We are really seeing some of Canada's most vulnerable populations, in particular seniors and those in rural areas who simply cannot access Service Canada operators to apply for these benefits. And these are some of the individuals who need them the most. And if I may say, I think that this is a crack that we see historically within the Liberal government, is that they often forget the most vulnerable. And in cases, even I would say with the Canada Child Benefit, I would say they perpetuate this poverty. But we're seeing this with Service Canada operations. I got phone calls from the interior of BC to the prairies of Saskatchewan to the lakes of Ontario, just individuals who could not get through to Service Canada to submit their applications. I heard horror stories about people who would wait 4 hours online only to have the line drop. And this is absolutely unacceptable. The government has a responsibility to apply these programs uniformly across all Canadians so that all Canadians have access to them. And right now, we're simply not seeing that. And even as a result of that, that's the reason, we submitted a letter to Minister Hussein saying, can you provide local numbers? Can you provide more employees for Service Canada? Take employees from other departments. Also, Jamie, we're hearing about Service Canada employees who do not have the proper equipment to work within their homes, so that in fact the entire workforce of Service Canada is not being utilized. So yes, these needs are being met, but many of the most vulnerable are being excluded.
You mentioned a whole slew of people that are falling through the cracks. We talked to James Cumming before this. He mentioned about businesses falling through the cracks. And I'm just going off the top of my head, so please forgive me. Wouldn't it be great if there was a legislative body where we could discuss these things openly in a manner that is respectful and just bouncing ideas back and bringing these ideas to the government and letting them know the concerns that we are having in our constituency so that they can work to fix these problems? Wouldn't it be great if there was that platform?
No, I couldn't agree more that it would be great that if there was this platform. And I'll tell you why.
Let's call it Parliament. What do we call it?
Parliament? Exactly.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, a fantastic idea. Because number one, it is a great amount of effort to write a letter to a minister. It takes complete analysis of the issue, thought of the solution. And this is something that generally goes into question period. But then you have to put it into paper, reach out to your colleagues.
I think the delay, too, in getting a response. That's the big one.
That's what I'm getting to, is that if you're lucky, you get a response. And in fact, the last 3 letters that I have submitted to my minister, I have not received a response. When you're in the House of Commons, the minister is sitting more than 2 meters away from you, Jamie, might I add. They are sitting not too much more, but a good 5 to 10 meters away. But guess what? They are obligated to respond to your question on behalf of, whether you're speaking for your constituents or Canadians, they have an obligation to respond. And we're just simply not seeing the necessity of response by the government in this environment that we're in this virtual environment. HUMA starts up tomorrow, the Human Resources Committee. I'm not optimistic about how it will go based upon the technological glitches that I've heard of other committees and the opportunity to catch the chair's eye, if you will, to put motions forward. We're missing on so many privileges, which we are allowed, which we have the right to and the obligation to as parliamentarians to Canadians. We are being denied these privileges to properly represent our constituents, and Parliament in person, done safely, respecting public health and safety standards, would resolve that.
And we did it this week, so it's entirely possible. But unfortunately, the Liberal Bloc coalition knocked us down to one in-person sitting a day with 2 virtual sittings. Again, the industry committee today was delayed at least 15 minutes with glitches in technology. I don't know how they're going to incorporate those in rural areas with no or little internet and cellular service. So this is going to be a feat in itself. But for some reason, I guess 3 sittings was too much for the government. They don't want to have this accountability as they shovel billions, hundreds of billions of dollars out the door. Stephanie, is there what is this? They're basically printing money and creating it out of thin air to pay these bills. I don't think it's sustainable. That's why there's a whole bunch of conversations that need to happen.
No, you're absolutely correct. And in fact, I'm starting to see conversations from financial analysts, et cetera, regarding inflation, that you just can't print money forever. But I tell you, when I am talking to my colleagues across Canada, and these are former ministers, former heads of university, leaders of industry, they mentioned 2 major concerns. The first one is the future of our supply chains. And I think Canada has an incredible role to play in that, given how many natural resources we are blessed with, given our knowledge of manufacturing in your backyard and in your home province of Ontario and beyond. But the second one is just the weight of this on the public treasury. This amount of spending, yes, we are in a dire situation. We are in a time of need. Canadians are in a time of need. But the public treasury cannot continue to handle this level of debt and a deficit, especially when we come out of this. We will be competing with the world, other nations emerging out of a global recession. I personally believe it will come down to who gets their economies back on track, who is the best as to setting up those supply chains, and who has the most access to capital. But this is something that, as we hand out these funds and help Canadians, and as I said, Canadians definitely need the assistance. I'll give you another example this week as well. $350 million was announced for charitable organizations. That's all well and good, but $350 million, Jamie, is a drop in the bucket compared to the destruction of this economy and what it will take to come back to rebuild the national purse and to rebuild the labor force and to rebuild this nation.
Well, look at even what's happening in your province, Saskatchewan included. The price of a barrel of Western Select was in the negative for the longest time. There's just no storage capacity, and of course, there's a price war being fought between the Saudis and the Russians. There were problems leading up to this virus, and now trying to attract those investment dollars is going to be even more difficult. But not only that, when we're looking at how we have more domestic production, we need to talk about creating an environment that allows manufacturing to succeed, but also the material, such as mining, that we need to create an environment that allows them to see certainty in the process.
Definitely. Again, in those conversations that I'm having with leaders across the nation, they are talking about food security, but they are also talking about energy security. And as terrible as this situation is across the nation, I can tell you that it is double-fold in Alberta as a result of the anti-energy production legislation that has come out of this Liberal government for the last 2 years. I don't need to remind you and our viewers about this. C-48, C-69. These were devastating blows dealt to our industry prior to this disaster. The Russian-Saudi situation just adds fuel to the fire. The decline of global demand as a result of this pandemic only adds to the fire. I'm really hopeful going forward that we as a nation will reevaluate the necessity for all forms of energy, but coming from Alberta in particular, petroleum products, which have been so crucial to the personal protective equipment that's required for this pandemic. But going forward, there will be an appreciation for it, not only for the products that it produces, but for the revenue, again, that we will so desperately need coming out of this crisis, Jamie. So that's my hope. I'm not encouraged by the package that was announced this week by the federal government to, I'm going to put in air quotes, help the industry. Again, in my opinion, and I believe in the opinions of industry members, it is a thinly disguised environmental plan, largely, as you know, dedicated to orphan wells, which actually really only helps one major organization. But what we need is a federal government that has appreciation for the energy sector and the revenue that it will create that we will so desperately need coming out of this pandemic with the not millions, billions we will have spent.
Well, I think it also is a big challenge for this Liberal government and their ideology, given the fact that they like to dump billions of dollars in subsidies and pick winners and losers in the marketplace. I think that flexibility for them to manipulate and put these market distortions hopefully is over and allows the market, the free market, to decide the future on a lot of these cases as well.
You're right. And we're seeing that at every single level, even within the Canada Summer Jobs Program, which almost to me at this point is irrelevant is too harsh a term. But with the student subsidy announced yesterday, how many students are I wonder if students will be motivated to work rather than just applying for the benefit as announced yesterday. But even there, we are being forced as members of parliament to choose winners and losers. You get money, you don't get money, and that it shouldn't be that way at all. So again, the expenses that we will have coming out of this in terms of rebuilding the national treasury, we can't even possibly imagine them. And in fact, I think that the government themselves has lost track of them. I think that they're only focused on, it's gone beyond just getting through the crisis. To me, it feels as though it is almost a campaigning exercise. But reality will have to be faced sooner or later because every dollar that goes out the door, we will have to recoup and add another one for it.
Stephanie Kusie, any last parting words before we let you go?
Stay home, stay safe, and be sure to wash your hands.
Thank you very much. Stephanie Kusie, Member of Parliament for Calgary, Mindapore. And maybe quickly, Stephanie, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I think I was remiss not to mention that at the beginning. But of course, our hearts, our prayers, our thoughts to the people of the province, the great province of Nova Scotia that have undergone this terrible, terrible tragedy. And to the families, the friends of the victims, to the fallen officer, to the officer recovering in hospital. We're all Nova Scotians today, I think.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, Member of Parliament for Calgary Mindapore, also the Shadow Minister for Families, Children and Social Developments. Thank you so much for joining us. We will have another broadcast of The Blueprint on Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope you can join us again. Help us push back against the Liberal agenda. Comment, like, subscribe, share this program, and again, we can do this together. So remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the Blueprint. Thanks for joining us.